Isn't that a great fun picture? Oh, I loved it. They don't make them like that anymore. Not a dirty word in it. But we could put a few in if you'd like.
Vincent, you were completely over the top in that performance.
Is that what I was?
Completely. I think that was one of the most delightfully far-out performances in a career full of far-out performances.
Yes. I've been far out a lot. But this one, it was legitimate. Dirty Waters. What an enchanting character he was. And Ronnie Coleman, you know, the first day that I was on the picture, I was such a fan of Ronnie Coleman's, and I never thought I'd get to work with him. But I couldn't open my mouth in the first scene. And I went to Dickie Wharf, the director, and I said, Dickie, I'm overwhelmed. I can't open my mouth. Can I play the scene that follows this, which I have nothing to say? And he let me play a scene in which I had nothing to say. God, Ronnie Coleman, wasn't he marvelous? He had the greatest movie technique I've ever known in my life. He'd start looking at the person he was talking to, and then he'd cast his eyes down, and the rest of it was all like this. He was reading cue cards. On television he did. Yeah.
But he was actually reading cue cards?
No,
not here. Okay.
Movies he knew.
Well, we have another really quite talented performer who was certainly contributed to, what should we say, about 50%, 40%, 30%, whatever, a huge percent of the delight of this film, and that's none other than Mr. Art Linkletter. And can we get him up here at the moment?
Isn't it amazing we're still living? Oh, boy.
What a picture. I haven't seen that since we made it, about 75 years ago.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's a delight. I go to movies all the time. I love movies. And it's a delight to see a movie where there isn't huge violence, tremendous foul language, and all kinds of blatant sex. Did you notice that when Ronald Coleman kissed Celeste Holmes, it did not look like a man eating a huge hamburger sandwich?
No, it didn't.
That's what the kisses look like today. They look like they're going to swallow their heads.
I think they do sometimes.
But they were delightful people to work with, and of course Vincent has made many, many, many great pictures. This is the only really great picture I ever made. And the interesting thing about it is, after I acted in this picture, I was never asked to act in another one.
Oh, but you were so wonderful in this picture.
Well,
I thought he really was, absolutely wonderful. I always wondered why he didn't go on in the movies, and then I finally found out one day he bought Australia.
No, I found what I like to do best, which of course is to be myself and talk to people. That's where I was best. Always in pictures, and I made a few television films. I always felt like I was fake. And I remember the most memorable scene that we made in the entire picture for me, you didn't see. You only saw a part of it. And that was the scene where Dirty Waters is sitting at his desk, and I'm telling him all the terrible things that are going to happen, and I wind up pouring the pills in his open mouth.
Yeah.
Now, as you may know from seeing breakup things and embarrassing things on the shows, outtakes they call, they occur when two very mature, sophisticated people become idiotic gigglers because of something that happened in the making of the first take. And you never can get the damn scene. And that scene we shot 14 times, because when I would get toward the end of my long speech, Vincent would look at me and I'd look at him and we'd start laughing like a bunch of school kids. Went on and on and on. Now we had a delightful director, Richard Wharf.
Wonderful.
He was an artist, he was a director, and he was an actor.
And he was a madman.
And he had a great
Wonderful
sense of humor. So he was fairly patient with us all through these takes and takes and takes. But it was getting near lunch, And unknown to Vincent and myself, Richard went around and told everybody, if these idiots break up again, we'll just leave all the lights on and everything, and we'll just leave and go to lunch. Well, we started, and we went through the scene, and sure enough, we laughed and laughed, and then we both quit. We said, you know, Richard, where the hell is everybody?
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do remember.
They were gone.
I do remember.
And we deserved it.
Oh, God.
Mr. Linkletter, this film certainly pokes fun at radio and television, and at that point and subsequently, you know, you were taking radio and television very seriously in your career. Did you feel that you were being disloyal in any way in engaging in this kind of broad satire?
Oh no, I think most everything we do in show business can be kidded and poked fun at. We're playing games. It's all pretend and it's all fun. And I think a lot of the quiz shows. I never actually did a nationwide quiz show because I felt the same way these pictures did. I thought a lot of them were very idiotic.
Yeah.
But they were fun, and I had nothing wrong with them. My shows were magazine shows and people's shows, and people are funny stunts. And then, of course, I hit upon the marvelous idea of talking to 4-year and 5-year-old children, which resulted, as you may know from my frank interviews with kids for 26 years, 5 days a week, in thousands of families moving away from L.A. and relocating under other names. Because of what the kids told me on the air.
True.
But I had nothing. I thought it was a great poke at something that is really kind of silly. And by the way, this show was the forerunner, without knowing it, of huge giveaways.
Yes.
Not just $64
$64 question was as much as they ever gave away,
yes,
wasn't it?
But then they went on to give away, as you know, and still do, give away gigantic prizes. And Vincent was so good with me because I was not an actor. I never had done any acting, and you were so kind to me, and you kept saying, "See, you're doing great." And for a young guy, of course, at that time, as you know on the screen, I was 16.
Oh my God! No,
but you were, and I thank you in public.
You were wonderful, wonderful in it, just wonderful.
Vincent, you had a real life run-in with a game show situation a few years later with the $64,000 challenge, and you were on, I believe, twice. Once
with the jockey Billy Pearson, and once with Edward G. Robinson. It was the only thing I knew anything about was art. And I used to have a game with myself of looking through a book and identifying painters. And somebody heard about this game that I played, because this is the way I sort of kept up with it, because I was an art historian before I was an actor. And it's one thing I know anything about, really. I mean, you could show me 18 movies, even the ones I was in, I wouldn't know what they were. But art I do know.
And you ended up actually, between the two, you tied both times, and so each time you took $32,000, and in the aggregate you walked away with $64,000. Now, what was it like to be challenged by Edward G. Robinson?
Well, Eddie, you know, his whole education was art. Eddie came from a very simple background, and when he discovered art, when he became a star, you know, and had the money to buy art, he really started to study, and he knew a tremendous amount about art. And don't forget, when you got on that show, you were told that you would not know any answers, but they told you that the questions were going to be in maybe 20 books. And I memorized 15 books. I just sat down and memorized them. You know, and sooner or later they had to ask one of those questions. Who painted the Last Supper? It wasn't as difficult as it sounded, because the questions were known to the audience. You know, I mean, they were known. In fact, they were about Michelangelo and Rembrandt and Titian and people like that. So they weren't just out of the blue questions. Because I told them when I went on it, I said, you ask me anything about China except whether something's Chinese, I won't know anything about it. You know, early poontang or something like that.
Holy smoke!
That's not a dirty word. That's a period of Chinese art.
I saw a cat on a hot tin roof. One thing about this picture that nobody outside of this cast ever knew that I think was fascinating, especially in view of Art Buchwald's recent huge suit for having supplied the original script of the Murphy show and the lawsuit, and the exposition of the creative bookkeeping that goes on in our business. When I was in this picture, I asked Nat Wolff, who was Ronnie Coleman's agent. I said, what kind of a deal should I make? And he said, well, I'll tell you the truth. He says, most of the stars think it's such a novel and interesting and different picture that we're going to work for practically scale, and instead of that, we're all going to take a percentage of the net. And I said, well, that sounds like a good idea, so I made the same deal. And if any of you know that any deal with a movie in which you get a percentage of the net, you discover that there never is a net.
Never.
Never is a net.
Never.
And so, I don't know whether you made the deal.
The same deal.
And so, we worked this whole picture for literally nothing, and the only reward I ever got out of it was that as I drive by out in Westwood, I passed the home that the producer bought. And I look up at it and I say, we're co-owners.
Yeah. I don't think Ronnie Coleman made that deal.
I think he did.
Did he really?
Yes, he did.
My God.
Everybody did.
But of course he'd been a star for 30 years.
Yes.
He had a few bucks tucked away.
And you didn't do badly?
No, after that I didn't ever get another comedy part.
No, but think of the people you've scared out of their wits.
Wow. They didn't have any wits to begin with. Right?
And Celeste is still around. You still see her acting and doing things.
Yeah, she's always.
But Barbara Britton was kind of vanished.
Beautiful. Really beautiful.
She vanished.
Yes,
gorgeous.
She didn't do anything more. She was married to a little psychiatrist.
Yes, I remember. He
was always on the set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't we take a few questions here, right in the middle?
Oh, thank you. Well, my favorite actor was a man named Charles Boyer. I did Don Juan in Hell with him, that great excerpt from George Bernard Shaw's Man and Superman. And I took over from Charles Lawton at the end of about a very long run, and played it for about a year with Boyer and Cedric Hardwicke and Agnes Moorehead. And I was stunned by his technique and his brilliance and his gentleness and his sweetness and the wonder of working with him. The other one was Ronnie Coleman. And funnily enough, when I first started in movies, I did what all theater actors do. I was all over the place with my mouth, and, trying to project. And the critics picked it up on me, and I went and studied with a lady in New York who all theater actors studied with. And she told me to go and see every Boyer movie I could go see, or every Coleman picture. And if you notice, they don't ever use their mouths. They talk through their eyes somehow. They were extraordinary actors. They were the greatest two movie actors I ever knew. Everybody's all over the place now.
How about director?
Director, Orson Welles. I did a play with Orson Welles called Heartbreak House of George Bernard Shaw again. And Orson was the most exciting director I ever worked with in my life. That's what he should have stayed in direction. I never thought he was as good an actor as he was a director. He was a brilliant director. Brilliant, imaginative, wonderful. He was 21 years old. I remember that because I celebrated 4 21st birthdays with him. When he finally died, I looked to see which year he'd picked that he was born.
You ever do Shakespeare?
Yes, a little bit of Shakespeare, and you saw Theater of Blood, some of you. I did 8 Shakespearean parts in that.
And one last part of your question was actress. Would that be Jean Tierney?
Actress?
Perhaps?
I love Jean Tierney. I thought she was one of the greatest actresses I ever worked with was Lorette Taylor, who did The Glass Menagerie, but I did her comeback. When her husband died, she went on what she called the longest wake in history. She was drunk for about 25 years, and then she made a comeback and became again one of the greatest stars in the world. And I think most actors that saw her or worked with her would think she was the greatest actress that they ever saw or worked with. She was brilliant, brilliant. I was in a play called Outward Bound, and she played Mrs. Midget. She played a Cockney lady, but it didn't matter to Lorette what accent she had, just as long as it was different from her own. Some nights she'd be Southern, some nights she'd be Irish, some nights she'd be Cockney, very seldom. But it didn't really make any difference. She just was the woman. She was extraordinary.
Right here.
Oh yeah, well, I'll never forget, I was invited by Ronnie to go to his house for dinner. This was when we finished Champagne for Caesar. And I really was still just boggled. I thought we'd become friends and we'd work together, and I really admired him just as much as I had when I hadn't worked with him, which doesn't always happen. I was bowled over by being asked to dinner. So my wife called up Mrs. Coleman and said, "What should I wear?" And Mrs. Coleman said, "A little black, dear, a little black," which means a very simple little black dress. So my wife got a little simple black dress, and we went to dinner, and we didn't ask Mr. Coleman where he lived, because I knew that he lived next door to Jack Benny. And I went next door to Jack Benny, and that wasn't where he lived. He never lived there, and I had to find out where the hell he lived. And we went to Jack Benny's house to ask where Ronnie Coleman lived. Then we got there to dinner, and my wife's in this little black dress, really a very simple little black dress, and Mrs. Coleman is dressed for the opening of the opera in Vienna. She looks like Brunhilde. The next lady to come in was Merle Oberon, who had a train on, and a tiara, and diamonds all around here. The next was Clark Gable and his wife. You never saw anything like it in your life. And we looked like country cousins. But they were dear and sweet and wonderful and laughed at themselves. Clark Gable was there, sure, why not? Absolute awe. Mr. Linkletter, I'd worked with Mr. Linkletter. We'd done a couple of very funny shows together. We'd done a lot of work together, as a matter of fact.
I must tell you that there is a difference between stars and performers, and one of the differences is that he is a star and he was invited to dinner at the Coleman house.
Right.
I wasn't there. I was washing cars.
But also, Ronnie always told me that you ate with your fingers.
Ronnie, I noticed this about Coleman. I had considerable awe for him, too, because he won Oscars and everything.
He's a huge star.
But with us backstage, he was a regular guy. Yeah. But I noticed that when she arrived, he became more British.
Yes.
They both, they tell me, reacted toward each other. They played British with each other, and otherwise she was talking like I'm talking. Suddenly, her name was
Venita.
Venita. She'd come to the set. He'd become very British. I didn't understand him at all.
No, I don't. Terribly funny man.
And then she married George Sanders.
George Sanders, yeah.
After Coleman. Oh, jeez.
But I did another picture with Ronnie that was really one of the worst pictures ever made, called The Story of Mankind. Oh, my God. Just terrible.
Why was it so awful?
Oh, it was awful. And somebody asked Ronnie in the dressing room one day, and I was sitting with him talking, and he said, "Mr. Coleman, where did they get the story for this picture?" And he said, "From the jacket of the book." That's about, the little blurb in the back. That was about all that was left of this picture.
Since you brought up the subject of a bad picture, the other day I was listening on the radio to Kirk Douglas being interviewed with his new book, doing Beating the Bushes. I've had a few books. You got to go out and talk to everybody. And the man said to him, "How many pictures have you made, Mr. Douglas?" He said, 68. And he said, and of the 68, I think about 22 I could be proud of him, and I thought were good. And I was startled to think of him making 45 pictures that he didn't care about. Now, in your case, how did you feel about your percentage of good pictures and bad pictures?
I wished you hadn't asked that. I picked the best pictures for this little festival. I did a couple in Italy that were so bad that I can't even remember the name of them. One of them I did with Riccardo Montalban, and he played a pirate, and his name was Gordon il Pirato Nero. Gordon the Black Pirate. I said, Gordon, for God's sake, where'd you get Gordon? Well, in Italy, Gordon is a very romantic name because of Byron, the great poet, whose name was Lord Gordon. So everybody who's a great romantic character is Gordon, il Pirato Nero. It was so bad that they lost the soundtrack. They literally lost the soundtrack. So when we had to dub it, we had to hire lip readers, because none of us could remember the dialogue. They lost that beforehand. But I had a ball. I was in Rome for 6 months. Oh,
that was about the time you made Queen of the Nile, too.
Nefertiti il Regina del Nilo. Oh, and another little turkey called Il Ultimo Uomo del Mondo. Woo! They should be in Italian. Oh, my God.
Was there a picture you wanted to make and waited and never did make, or something that you haven't done yet that you wanted
It's too
to
late
do?
now. Really.
No, I don't know. Well, it's too late for a young lover, but for an older lover.
Thank you. No, I missed a couple. Yeah, I missed a couple
That you wanted.
that I would love to have done, but I was doing something else, and I had to make up my mind which one to do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Dr. Reed.
100 times. Dr. Reed. Well, it would be one of two, either Dragonwyck or The Eve of St. Mark. I loved the part in The Eve of St. Mark, and it was a story that was very touching to me, because it was all the young fellows who are drafted in the war and don't really know what the hell the war is about. And I thought it had great poetic beauty, that film and that part. But Dragonwyck, probably. I love Dragonwyck.
One last question here, in the middle.
No, I did a one-man show about Oscar Wilde called Diversions and Delights. And I think it's the best thing I ever did in my life. It was Oscar Wilde, all alone, just coming out and trying to make a little money for himself and amusing the audience, and sometimes getting a little carried away into the sentiment and the tragedy of his life. I love doing that. That certainly is far and away the best thing I've ever seen, but it was never taped. It broke my heart in a small way, though I don't think one-man shows often translate onto the screen very well. But it broke my heart that it wasn't done, because I'd like to have seen it.
Do you like seeing yourself on the screen?
Occasionally, yes. It's a feeling akin to nausea. I'll never forget the first time I was driving down the highway and I saw an outdoor screen with my head about 30 feet tall. And I got out and threw up.
I think every actor kind of has some nervous moments about seeing himself, because as you do it, you have another idea. And I came here tonight. I haven't seen the picture since we made it, and I was prepared to slink down in the chair a little, and I was delighted to see how handsome and virile, and how good I was.
You still are, Art. Oh. Isn't he wonderful looking? They're thinking of putting him up on Mount Rushmore.
Well, on Tuesday of this week, I'm 78.
Are you?
Yeah, 78.
78.
Yeah.
Because I always knew you were 10 years or so older than I was, and
It's true.
I'm 1 year older than he is.
And so
79, skidoo.
Well, I want to thank both of you for making this such a thrilling and wonderful event of Champagne for Caesar. One of my favorites, one of Judy Stangler's absolute favorites. In fact, without Judy, we would not be having this weekend, and I want to commend her
Judy,
for her
thank
help.
you.
She laughed all the way through it.
Yeah,
Loved it.
No,
Never saw it
she not
different.
only laughed, but she was saying every line of dialogue throughout the entire film. Anyway, we must now